Chapter 1, Book 5 of Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Woods. Les Misérables, Volume 3 by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel, Florence HAPGOOD. Book 5, Les Misérables, Chapter 1, Marius Indigent. Life became hard for Marius. It was nothing to eat his clothes and his watch. He ate of that terrible, inexpressible thing that is called de la vache en rage. That is to say, he endured great hardships and privations. A terrible thing it is, containing days without bread, nights without sleep, evenings without a candle, a hearth without a fire, weeks without work, a future without hope, a coat out at the elbows, an old hat which evokes the laughter of young girls, a door which one finds locked on one at night because one's rent is not paid, the insolence of the porter and the cook-shop man, the sneers of neighbors, humiliations, dignity trampled on, work of whatever nature accepted, disgust, bitterness, despondency. Marius learned how all this is eaten, and how such are often the only things which one has to devour. At that moment of his existence when a man needs his pride because he needs love, he felt that he was jeered at because he was badly dressed, and ridiculous because he was poor. At the age when youth swells the heart with imperial pride, he dropped his eyes more than once on his dilapidated boots, and he knew the unjust shame and the poignant blushes of wretchedness. Admirable and terrible trial, from which the feeble emerge base, from which the strong emerge sublime. A crucible into which destiny casts a man, whenever it desires a scoundrel or a demagogue. For many great deeds are performed in petty combats. There are instances of bravery ignored and obstinate, which defend themselves step by step in that fatal onslaught of necessities and turpitudes. Noble and mysterious triumphs which no eye beholds, which are requited with no renown, which are saluted with no trumpet blast. Life, misfortune, isolation, abandonment, poverty, are fields of battle which have their heroes, obscure heroes who are sometimes grander than the heroes who win renown. Firm and rare natures are thus created. Misery, almost always a stepmother, is sometimes a mother. Destitution gives birth to might of soul and spirit. Distress is the nurse of pride. Unhappiness is a good milk for the magnanimous. There came a moment in Marius' life when he swept his own landing, when he bought his sou's worth of brie cheese at the fruiterer's, when he waited until twilight had fallen to slip into the baker's and purchase a loaf, which he carried off furtively to his attic as though he had stolen it. Sometimes there could be seen gliding into the butcher's shop on the corner, in the midst of the bantering cooks who elbowed him, an awkward young man, carrying big books under his arm, who had a timid yet angry air, who on entering removed his hat from a brow whereon stood drops of perspiration, made a profound bow to the butcher's astonished wife, asked for a mutton cutlet, paid 6 or 7 sous for it, wrapped it up in a paper, put it under his arm between 2 books, and went away. It was Marius. On this cutlet, which he cooked for himself, he lived for 3 days. On the first day he ate the meat. On the second he ate the fat. On the third he gnawed the bone. Aunt Gillenormand made repeated attempts, and sent him the 60 pistoles several times. Marius returned them on every occasion, saying that he needed nothing. He was still in mourning for his father when the revolution which we have just described was effected within him. From that time forth he had not put off his black garments, but his garments were quitting him. The day came when he had no longer a coat, the trousers would go next. What was to be done? Courfeyrac, to whom he had on his side done some good turns, gave him an old coat. For 30 sous Marius got it turned by some porter or other, and it was a new coat. But this coat was green. Then Marius ceased to go out until after nightfall. This made his coat black. As he wished always to appear in mourning, he clothed himself with the night. In spite of all this, he got admitted to practice as a lawyer. He was supposed to live in Courfeyrac's room, which was decent, and where a certain number of law books, backed up and completed by several dilapidated volumes of romance, passed as the library required by the regulations. He had his letters addressed to Courfeyrac's quarters. When Marius became a lawyer, he informed his grandfather of the fact in a letter which was cold but full of submission and respect. M. Gillenormand trembled as he took the letter, read it, tore it in 4 pieces, and threw it into the wastebasket. 2 or 3 days later, Mademoiselle Gillenormand heard her father, who was alone in his room, talking aloud to himself. He always did this whenever he was greatly agitated. She listened, and the old man was saying, "If you were not a fool, you would know that one cannot be a baron and a lawyer at the same time."
Chapter 2. Marius Poor. It is the same with wretchedness as with everything else. It ends by becoming bearable. It finally assumes a form, and adjusts itself. One vegetates, that is to say, one develops in a certain meagre fashion, which is, however, sufficient for life. This is the mode in which the existence of Marius Pontmercy was arranged. He had passed the worst straits. The narrow pass was opening out a little in front of him. By dint of toil, perseverance, courage, and will, he had managed to draw from his work about 700 francs a year. He had learned German and English, thanks to Courfeyrac, who had put him in communication with his friend, the publisher. Marius filled the modest post of utility man in literature at the publishing house. He drew prospectuses, translated newspapers, annotated editions, compiled biographies, etc. Net product, year in and year out, 700 francs. He lived on it. How? Not so badly. We will explain. Marius occupied in the Gorbeau house, for an annual sum of 30 francs, a den minus a fireplace, called the cabinet, which contained only the most indispensable articles of furniture. This furniture belonged to him. He gave 3 francs a month to the old principal tenant to come and sweep his hole, and to bring him a little hot water every morning, a fresh egg, and a penny roll. He breakfasted on his egg and roll. His breakfast varied in cost from 2 to 4 sous, according as eggs were dear or cheap. At 6 o'clock in the evening he descended the Rue Saint-Jacques, to dine at Rousseau's, opposite Basset's, the stamp dealer's, on the corner of Rue des Mathurins. He ate no soup. He took a 6 sous plate of meat, half portion of vegetables for 3 sous, and 3 sous dessert. For 3 sous he got as much bread as he wished. As for wine, he drank water. When he paid at the desk where Madame Rousseau, at that period still plump and rosy, majestically presided, he gave a sou to the waiter, and Madame Rousseau gave him a smile. Then he went away. For 16 sous he had a smile and a dinner. This restaurant Rousseau, where so few bottles and so many water carafes were emptied, was a calming potion rather than a restaurant. It no longer exists. The proprietor had a fine nickname. He was called Rousseau the Aquatic. Thus breakfast 4 sous, dinner 16 sous. His food cost him 20 sous a day, which made 365 francs a year. Add the 30 francs for rent, and 36 francs to the old woman, plus a few trifling expenses. For 450 francs, Marius was fed, lodged, and waited on. His clothing cost him 100 francs, his linen 50 francs, his washing 50 francs. The whole did not exceed 650 francs. He was rich. He sometimes lent 10 francs to a friend. Courfeyrac had once been able to borrow 60 francs from him. As far as fire was concerned, as Marius had no fireplace, he had simplified matters. Marius always had 2 complete suits of clothes, the one old for every day, the other brand new for special occasions. Both were black. He had but 3 shirts, one on his person, the second in the commode, and the third in the washerwoman's hands. He renewed them as they wore out. They were always ragged, which caused him to button his coat to the chin. It had required years for Marius to attain this flourishing condition, hard years, difficult, some of them, to traverse, others to climb. Marius had not failed for a single day. He had endured everything in the way of destitution. He had done everything except contract debts. He did himself the justice to say that he had never owed any one a sou. A debt was, to him, the beginning of slavery. He even said to himself that a creditor is worse than a master, for the master possesses only your person, a creditor possesses your dignity, and can administer to it a box on the ear. Rather than borrow, he went without food. He had passed many a day fasting, feeling that all extremes meet, and that, if one is not on one's guard, lowered fortunes may lead to baseness of soul. He kept a jealous watch on his pride, such and such a formality of action, which, in any other situation, would have appeared merely deference to him, now seemed insipidity, and he nerved himself against it. His face wore a sort of severe flush. He was timid even to rudeness. During all his trials he had felt himself encouraged and even uplifted, at times, by a secret force that he possessed within himself. The soul aids the body, and at certain moments erases it. It is the only bird that bears up its own cage. Besides his father's name, another name was graven in Marius' heart, the name of Thénardier. Marius, with his grave enthusiastic nature, surrounded with a sort of aureole the man to whom, in his thought, he owed his father's life, that intrepid sergeant who had saved the colonel amid the bullets and the cannon balls at Waterloo. He never separated the memory of this man from the memory of his father, and he associated them with his veneration. It was a sort of worship in 2 steps, with a grand altar for the colonel and the lesser one for Thénardier. What redoubled the tenderness of this gratitude towards Thénardier was the idea of distress into which he knew that Thénardier had fallen, and which had engulfed the latter. Marius had learned at Montfermeil of the ruin and bankruptcy of the unfortunate innkeeper. Since that time he had made unheard of efforts to find traces of him, and to reach him in that dark abyss of misery in which Thénardier had disappeared. Marius had beaten the whole country. He had gone to Chelles, to Bondy, to Gournay, to Nogent, to Lagny. He had persisted for 3 years, expending on these explorations little money which he had laid by. No one had been able to give him any news of Thénardier. He was supposed to have gone abroad. His creditors had also sought him, with less love than Marius, but with as much assiduity, and had not been able to lay their hands on him. Marius blamed himself, and was almost angry with himself for his lack of success in his researches. It was the only debt left him by the colonel, and Marius made it a matter of honour to pay it. What, he thought, when my father lay dying on the field of battle, did Thénardier contrive to find him amid the smoke in a grape shot, and bear him off on his shoulders? And yet he owed him nothing, and I, who owe so much to Thénardier, cannot join him in this shadow where he is lying with the pangs of death, and in my turn bring him back from death to life. Oh, I will find him. To find Thénardier, in fact, Marius would have given one of his arms. To rescue him from his misery, he would have sacrificed all his blood. To see Thénardier, to render Thénardier some service, to say to him, "You do not know me, well, I do know you. Here I am, dispose of me." This was Marius' sweetest and most magnificent dream. End of chapter 2. Recording by April Gonzalez in Cavite, Philippines.